So I don't know any details of your situation. So I'm going to have to speak about this in terms of generalized patterns that I know from years and years of working with these things. So typically when you have a person, regardless of what type of relationship you have with them, and every time you get together, it loops, it cycles. You always end up with a conflict. You always end up at each other's throats. You always end up, something is always wrong every time you get together. And even if both of you intellectually are on the same page and you want to make it work, ultimately what your bodies are telling you is that you are activated to the point of hostility every time you're around them. You're on the defensive with them, they're on the defensive with you, and that makes communication almost impossible. And that means your emotional activation system has decided that this person is no longer safe for you. And it is very hard to get that to not be the case. So this is a sad reality. Sometimes there's too much history. Sometimes there's just too much. And if you actually love yourself and if you actually love them, then going your own ways is the best way to go. Because the reality is your system has emotional activation, and we have emotional activation for a lot of things. So you get activated because you get to see somebody you like. You get activation because you see someone you love. You get activation because you're excited about a new event or a new concert or a new movie. You get emotional activation for lots of things that are good in life. We also have emotional activation for stress and bad things that are coming down the line, and for various forms of conflict with other people. And after a while, if we keep having conflict with the same person, our system goes to red alert automatically with that person. And it's very difficult to walk that back down to not going to red alert. So your systems decide for you in a lot of ways whether this person is trustworthy or worthy of engaging with in a way that is safe for you. And even if you intellectually have worked through problems and you have said you've apologized and acknowledged where you screwed up, you may not be safe for them. And I think that it's worth reflecting, they may not be safe for you either. Because I know that you're trying to gain their approval, their forgiveness, their ability to stay in your life. And in a lot of ways, we have to remember that if you are constantly needing to prove your value to this person now, that you're putting yourself into a power imbalance, and that is actually diminishing you. And so this may not be a good thing for you because you're becoming emotionally activated in a way that is trying to constantly prove yourself, which is not a great place to be in if you're trying to be in an even relationship with somebody. That's a differential of power and giving them now the power over you to determine your self-worth and your value. So it is worth looking at that. Even if you love this person, even if they love you, that you're at a point right now where you're both activating each other and are likely setting each other off in a way that completely prohibits healthy communication. And that if you care about each other, that you should probably take that apart, because the separation is needed so you don't keep hurting each other by accident. And this is a big thing. We have to recognize sometimes we've went around that merry-go-round too many times. There's just not a way to fix that. When we come together, all of that baggage reactivates into this merry-go-round of doom. And that's just a reality of relationships sometimes. I mean, we're all going to screw up in relationships. This is important to acknowledge. We are all at some point going to fuck up in relationships. And that is not doom, anything. Because being in a relationship involves screwing up and making amends. And also, at a certain point, if you're at that looping place where you've worked through this, you've apologized, you've acknowledged, you've done these things, and it's still screwing up and activating that carousel of doom, then you're at a point where you're just hurting each other by accident now. And continuing on with that, that's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for them. And with that, sometimes going, listen, hey, I really value you and I know I screwed up and this is obviously setting both of us off. I don't think it's fair to you to have this situation constantly brought up the minute I try to talk to you. I don't think it's fair to me to constantly be in this situation and this dynamic. whatever it is for you, right? I don't know the details again, so this is more of you kind of being able to adapt this to your own situation. But being able to communicate that and then go, I think it may be better for us to go our own ways. Whatever that is for you, right? Whatever that looks like for that relationship. Now, sometimes, depending on the type of relationship, you can renegotiate the boundaries or expectations of that relationship. So for some people, this might be something where they say, okay, I'm not going to go fully no contact with a family member, but I'm definitely renegotiating those boundaries. So let's say you have a mother that's really overbearing and you go, listen, Mom, I love you, but I'm not going to talk about my relationships with you anymore because every time I do, this happens and it upsets me, and then you get defensive, and then it goes on the cycle again. So we have put off limits talking about my relationships. We can talk about anything else that is not reactive to us. We can catch up with each other, but my relationships are off the table because we know that that's going to set us off. So sometimes you can set new parameters and the person can accept it or not, right? Sometimes that person's going to go, screw you, I don't want to talk to you again. And that is their choice too. But sometimes you can renegotiate the parameters of what your relationship looks like or what it includes. But again, the reactivity of that activation that's happening may mean that this is going to be a hostile encounter as well, and ultimately break the friendship, the connection, the relationship in general. And you have to be willing to accept that that may be an outcome there as well. So these are the kinds of things that typically are happening once you are at a point where you are looping with folks. Even marriage therapists and counselors very often will see couples that both intellectually want to make this work, try to make this work, but it ultimately ends up in them doing divorce therapy and minimizing the amount of hostility in the separation because they both are at a point where that loop is just, they're not safe for each other anymore. And there's too much baggage and too much experience and too much emotional activation to ever have a healthy communication. They're just no longer safe for each other. And the healthiest thing for both of them to do is to separate. So this is true not only of marriages, but family relationships, friendships, lovers, partners, anybody else you might be in partner with. Like even people in jobs. Sometimes a job is the same way. So this is a pattern that people have to recognize. And yes, we're all going to screw up in our relationships. And also sometimes those things have to end. And that's a hard thing to do. So if that has to end, if this is a point where you're recognizing that, give yourself some space. This is a grief process. This is a loss. And even the loss of acknowledging that this situation is hurting you too. And that you don't need to prove yourself like that to every single person. I don't know the individual dynamics, but again, having to constantly be in the lower position of power to prove that you're worthy of this person is also not healthy for you. And so there's going to be a lot of work to do to help yourself in that particular path, to figure out what you want to do, who you want to be, how you want to grow, so that you have value within yourself and aren't having to prove it to everyone else as well. So hopefully that helped. Feel free to ask more questions.